My name's Rosalind, and I'm going to talk about the network that I run and the way that I approach the problem of plastics. I am a lawyer, and I think about governance issues in relation to the wicked problem of plastics. I'm going to explain a little bit about network first of all. The Governing Plastics Network is a group run jointly between my university, the University of Surrey in the UK, and the University of Nairobi, Kenya. And we've run a number of different research projects, including countries around East Africa and the Caribbean, looking at issues of plastics and the governance of plastics. For example, how you might have good communications campaigns around plastics, especially changes in governance, changes in the law. And that's, we run a weekly video or blog under the network. So if you'd like to join, we're very pleased. And of course, we're just about to move into the 4th session of the Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee for the Global Plastics Treaty. So we tend to get quite big blogging during that week, because it's being run in Canada, as you'll know, in Ottawa this year. So I'm going to talk about legal tools. How can we eliminate waste? We have this notion that there will be a day when we don't understand, we don't remember what the word waste means, but it is meaningless to us because we use all our materials, we retain all our materials as stocks in the economy, and nothing is wasted. I do, of course, understand that the rules of thermodynamics mean that you can never entirely eliminate waste. So please allow me that license in my talk. And then I'm going to talk about legal tools we need to design and how we should design the law to prevent plastics waste and stimulate an economy where we retain these materials as stock. And finally, how can we influence policymakers to implement those tools? So designing law to prevent ecological harm, I think sometimes it's get a bit of bad press, and I think it's very often because when something goes wrong in your life, you turn to a lawyer. You buy something that doesn't work, get fired, you get divorced, and you turn to a lawyer. And so we're associated with the bad things in life. And one of my themes is that we really need to move from issues around liability as lawyers to issues around prevention. If you're at this point where you're dealing with the plastic that's killed the whale, as in this story, and we're too late, we need to resolve this problem before it happens. So the legal tools that I'm interested in are tools that actually prevent this kind of harm occurring. So moving from liability to prevention is a key issue in terms of designing legal tools. Eliminating waste as a concept and looking at assessing the ecological impacts of plastic products and designing those tools to stimulate an economy. So one of the key ways to do that is to move from our current approach, our linear economy, where you take your resources from the environment, you make something, you use it for a while, and then you throw it back into the environment afterwards. And our laws are currently focused on that. It's our economy is structured that way. Our laws tend to focus that way. We need to move from that structure where we're looking at materials flowing through the economy to laws that are designed to prevent the assets being lost from the economy, to hold them as stocks and to use waste as an input. So thinking about the whole life cycle of a product is key. So how do we use the law to achieve that? The European Union has an approach to the integrated policy for products. It looks at the ways in which we can deal with every stage of the life cycle and uses and proposes a number of different tools. And that's a very early policy that was reflected in the law in the Eco-Design Directive. And the Eco-Design Directive has been a very successful approach to redesigning products which use energy in ways where they are less energy intensive. And now we have on the agenda a new law in the European Union, the Eco-Design for Sustainable Products Regulation, which is going further than the Eco-Design Directive. It's not just looking at energy-related products, but looking at other issues around product design, such as longevity, durability, and retention of products in that way. So the way that we need to go forward is to focus on regulating the product and not just the process. At the moment, we the laws tend to focus on the whole process around making things, a little bit like a sausage, a long sausage, where you slice it up and you regulate different points in that whole process. And one of the problems around that is that you get a disconnect between production and consumption. Our laws are very focused on these salami points. So materials and energy extraction, we have lots of laws that manage that part of the process. We have laws that manage the operational part of manufacturing. And we have laws that deal with distribution of goods. We have less laws that deal with the use of goods. So the lifetime part of goods is less regulated. And then at the end of life, we then have more laws that focus on that. So this is my salami approach. You chop up that process and we regulate at these different points in it, rather than thinking about the whole life approach. So we need to turn to a closed loop circular economy where we retain stocks of materials, and we need a regulatory framework to drive that economy. Earlier today, I had the advantage of listening to a number of talks that focused on the science and the engineering and the technology behind that closed loop economy. And it's always important to integrate into that, to base on those principles, the laws that will enable them to happen. Now, the thing about plastics, of course, is that a world without plastics is almost unimaginable. I'm actually almost old enough to remember a world without plastics, but the way that it has become to dominate our lives is quite extraordinary. And of course, we have that statistic from Roland Geyer of the 8 million tons of plastic in the ocean. So our challenge now is to invent these closed loop ways to benefit that, to achieve that closed loop economy. And here we have the life cycle of plastics, and we have the extraction at the moment going round the whole circle and taking out going back into the environment at the end. And the trick is to close that loop, to try and retain the materials for as long as we can in the use phase here, to repair, to refurbish. If we can't do that, to go to recycling and bring it back in to the outer loop that way. So we need laws that impact at each point of this life cycle, laws that encourage reuse, that drive the right to repair, that enable recycling, the standardization and labeling of goods, that enable recycling to happen. So it requires a multidisciplinary approach. This is why it's a wicked problem. It needs good science, clear regulation on a circular basis to retain the materials as stocks and to generate a zero plastics waste economy. And we need to understand the problem before we can design it out of the system. The drivers of change here in the UK. One of our great drivers of change is the great David Attenborough, who in a whole series, Blue Planet, spent 2 minutes talking about the problems of plastic pollution, and the whole issue then went up to Parliament and became very much a topic of concern. What will drive these necessary changes? Things like campaigning, communications, knowledge, of course, education. at global level, and I know Enrique is going to speak next, and is a great expert on the treaty, but at world level, of course, we've got the incoming Global Plastics Treaty, where that whole knowledge and awareness and public consciousness of the problem of plastics pollution has triggered the development of a treaty at international level. And that work is ongoing. As I said earlier, we are moving into the fourth session of the Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee, and there are a number of useful documents that you may find of interest here. Of course, the fourth session is taking place on the other side of the country in Ottawa. There's a lot of very interesting developments and policy going on there. So the problem is to identify those tools for the management of plastics and the waste, which are most effective in stimulating an economy where we retain plastics as stocks rather than let them escape into the environment. And then we have to implement and enforce those legal tools. So that brings me to the end of my talk, and I'd be happy to take any questions. But please do think about joining the Governing Plastics Network and join that community of people who are concerned about the problem. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Dr. Malcolm. We have about 5 minutes between the speakers for any clarification questions. Otherwise, we're going to try to preserve some time at the end for a more robust discussion. Anyone have any burning questions that you want to ask of Dr. Malcolm? Okay, seeing none, we want to turn it over to Dr. Enrique Pincini. He is an official with UNCTAD, a UN Conference on Trade and Development. Although I think he told me today the name changed. Yeah. You might want to stand up here because the microphone's up here. And actually up here because the people online will be able to see you.
I can put the stage on. We're losing the 5 minutes that we have in the end for technical. Good. Well, thanks again, Andy and SFU for hosting me here today and all the attendees. I work for the UN Trade and Development, the organization that deals with trade in the United Nations system. We, as Professor Rosalind mentioned, are working as well in the treaty to redefine or redesign how plastics are regulated worldwide. The next negotiation session is next week in Ottawa. I come from the trade perspective, right? So plastics are massively traded. They are very large markets in the world. $1.2 trillion of plastics are traded every year. And just a small fraction of that is plastic scrap. So most plastics, a lot of parts, large share of plastics are traded, but their end of life is domestic. They're not traded in terms of waste between countries, but they find the end inside the countries. And of course, most countries have insufficient recycling capacities. We have an interesting approach in UNCTAD, the agency where I work. for dealing with the theme. We try to drive the policy debate based on projects, so based on empirical evidence from the field. For example, we are working in Ghana on replacing mulch film, so plastics in agriculture. So those of you who have been to agricultural sites, you know that a lot of plastics are used to conserve moisture and preserve soils during cultivation. This is, for example, pineapple, but it can be replaced by biomass. We are funding some trials on that as part of the program. We are also working in Nigeria with modular plastics recycling systems. Imagine a container with solar panels on the roof that is independent from the electricity grid in the country, which is unreliable. That can also produce data points, so traceability of where the plastics are coming from in the community, how much people are being paid for those plastics, how long it takes to bring it, and to create basically a heat map inside a very large city, Lagos, I think 18 million people living there. And there's no data so far. So we are funding novel approaches to do modular recycling, also with data-enabled systems. We're also working to capture plastics from rivers. This is focused on a project we have in Ghana, outskirts of Accra. And very happy to say that the project in Nepal, coordinated by University of Cambridge together with Impact Hub Kathmandu, we're making materials out of upcycled plastics. So they take plastics from the environment or from collections in villages, also in Kathmandu, and they make various types of products using entrepreneurship approaches to train students who are mostly engineering majors. South Africa, we're working to develop biodegradable fishing gear and biodegradable ropes that are used to grow seaweed. They are being trialed in the coast of Kenya. Let's go to the non-plastic sector. We call plastic. We try to separate the material space in two large categories. One, we call them plastic alternatives, be less light on the presentation, and the other non-plastic substitutes. So what is a plastic alternative? We call it a plastic alternative as a better plastics, for example, biodegradable or bio-based plastic. It just looks like plastics. It looks like the same, but it's supposed to have a better characteristic. And what is a plastic substitute, which is behind me? It's a non-plastic material, right? It's like aluminum, glass, clay, everything that is from mineral or natural origin that is not plastic polymer. And we've been trying to map those materials because they are also traded in the world with HS codes under the harmonized system, so that you can more or less map how much of those materials are flowing around the world. So we try to look at those materials, the plastic substitutes, non-plastic materials, and we reached to a figure of $388 billion per year back in 2020. We are updating those figures. And most of those non-plastic substitutes, as they are called in the treaty, are materials. So they have low value added, like cellular pulp or cotton fiber or clay. And 1/3 of those materials are transformed and traded as products. So with more value added, like a paper cup or a glass bottle. If you look at those of you, I don't know if there's law students or public policy students here, but if you look at the UNEP website today, you see the latest version of the negotiation text for the Global Plastics Treaty. It has various areas, for example, dealing with plastic alternatives and substitutes, the extended producer responsibility, with the recycling capacities, also with a reduction of discussions, like potentially to limit the production of new polymers. All those points, of course, are very contentious and the country disagree, and hopefully we reach more agreement next week. It's very important to think about materials as rules or as options that you make. There's no golden solution or silver bullet. If you look at the life cycle analysis or those dashboards, UNEP has many of those. We have also produced some analysis to look at how we compare a natural fiber material, for example, banana leaf plates. Those of you who have been to the Philippines or to Kenya, you'll see them very often with a plastic plate, a polystyrene plate. And depending on the category of life cycle analysis or performance, for example, terrestrial acidification or land use or greenhouse gas emissions, some materials will perform better, others will perform worse. And in bio-based materials, banana leaves plates can perform worse than plastics depending on the category. For example, marine eutrophication. The banana leaf plate here, the green bar, can be more intense in marine eutrophication than plastics itself. So we are probably not, probably don't want to go from a material system that depends on a lot of plastic to a material system that depends on the same amount of volume of some other material, because that will create other problems. We need to reduce the amount of material intensity and potentially stimulate reuse. Should have started with this. So this is just a visual illustration to perhaps fix your minds. This is not a golden rule, right? But it helps to think about the options. So plastic substitutes here to the left and plastic alternatives to the right. And both are necessary to tackle the problem. The thing is that plastics are the big material traded, right? Around that was in 2020, $1 trillion. Plastic substitutes are also very large, around 1/3 of that, 388 billion. But plastic alternatives, so bioplastics, biodegradable plastics, are very small today. So they could be a promising option in the future, but today they are still growing, or they are still a very minor share of the market. Plastics have an impact on human health. There has been discussions on microplastics tests. There are a lot of research being done on that as we speak. But we also try to quantify, using our products in the field, how much life is saved, or healthy life is saved in terms of days, of years, per ton of plastics removed from the environment. Taking into account the direct effects on the workers, for example, if you're going to recycle material, plastic material, the particulate matter, how bad this can be for your health, but also taking into account the avoidance. For example, if you use recycled plastics, you avoid new plastics, or you avoid wood or fiberglass or other material that you are not needing because you recycle plastic. So we try to parameterize depending on the product we have in the field. And we're looking at the products we have in Zimbabwe, Ghana, Kenya, to see to try to estimate gains in healthy life from every ton of plastics removed from the environment. They are highly context specific. In Kenya, for example, you see 24 years per ton. And because this flip-floppy product, a fantastic product, by the way, it's removing plastics from the Lamu archipelago in Kenya. And if you are in an isolated area, like in the mountains of Nepal or in an island, you are more exposed to the pollution because there's more limited capacity to get rid of it, and people are more directly and indirectly exposed to reverse loops. So we also try to map what kind of regulations countries use on plastic substitutes today. So regulations that impact their trade. And we found out that most regulations are focused on the protection of human health. For example, the properties of a barrier, if the material is a good barrier maintainer. Also to look if the material contains additives that can be detrimental to health. So this is important because there's a lot of discussions around creating, say, sustainability criteria for plastic substitutes. But we already have an inference point because countries already regulate paper, cotton, glass, plate today. So we try to map that to help countries to understand what's already on the landscape. And just as a curiosity, most regulations on plastic substitutes are coming from developing and least developed countries. But most grants and financial subsidies to development of non-plastic substitutes come from developed countries, of course, because they have the financial power to be able to promote material development actively. Developing and least developed countries are relegated to use command and control instruments, so they can control the market, hopefully enforce it, but they are less able to subsidize and support novel materials. We've also kind of run some comparative checks with the current state of the world, looking at what kind of measures countries can adopt in an eventual treaty domestically and at the border to control specific materials, especially plastics. And looking at the projects we have in the field, in Kenya, in Ghana, in Nepal, and we looked at, so gray means no impact, green means a positive impact, and red means a negative impact on the project, on the entrepreneur in the field. So this is the picture today. And then we asked the entrepreneurs what do you think if those measures are control measures are adopted on plastics at the border and nationally. And there's a general optimistic stance from entrepreneurs that more control on plastics tend to benefit, especially recyclers and upcyclers, entrepreneurs. And finally, we are, of course, continue to work. We're trying to map something that is quite complicated, like trading services that are important to deal with plastic pollution. Just think recycling, for example, or EPR systems that involve services which are a bit harder to conceptualize than products. Products are tangible. We're also mapping specific marine-based plastic substitutes, for example, seaweeds or minerals starting from the oceans. We are working with regulations or regulatory models for biodegradation, because a lot of countries do not have specific rules for biodegradables and compostables. Those products entering the country just labeled as plastics or a specific polymer. But there's no precision, and then they are complicated because once they enter the recycling system, they create problems. But I think what the interesting part as well is that we have the products in the field making, for example, fibers, natural fibers out of pineapple waste. Those fibers displace indirectly polyester. We are also linking those fiber producers with the upstream partners in, for example, this is for just looking at Bangladesh in Fakir Group, who is testing the fibers to blend with cotton to make garments for sales in Europe, and of course developing novel materials that reduce ocean plastic pollution, such as biodegradable ropes for seaweed production. I think I went a bit beyond 10 minutes, but thank you.
Thank you very much. Or questions or comments to Dr. Piccini about INCAD's work in terms of trying to find substitutes for plastics and finding policies that will also support the reduction of the use of plastics, even the reduction of the manufacture of plastics. Any questions for Dr. Piccini?
Can you talk a little bit more about the biodegradable rope?
Certainly. It is produced by a company called Gaia Biomaterials in Sweden, and it's exported to South Africa to be spun into nets and ropes by a company called Alnet. And it's being tested in South Africa, in Kenya, and also in the Syntec group in Norway, testing company. The polymers used are PBAT and PBS. So it's not a fully bio-based material, but it's supposed to biodegrade within 5 years in ocean conditions. They are also trying to run tests in other countries in other different types of water, warmer waters, colder waters, to test the biodegradation efficiency in those places to produce.
Is the integrity good for fishing?
They're producing 3 types of products. They're producing fishing nets, they're producing ropes for seaweed production, and some cups for clams for clam farms.
Any other questions? The work he's very humble. The work Dr. Piccini is doing is covering large numbers of countries and dozens of projects across sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. And it's really an effort to stop the waste at its source, to reduce the manufacture of plastics, because as you all know, the majority of the countries in those regions don't have proper recycling or waste facilities. So the majority of the plastic is actually just being burned, or it breaks down and it's being put into waterways, and that's all coming into our oceans. So it's really important work. Thank you so much for sharing that. Okay. Over to Dr. Rishi Gupta of University of Victoria.
Thank you, Andy, very much. On a sunny Friday afternoon, when I see people listening to any talk, I call them very, very committed attendees. Thank you, everybody, for coming. That's a pretty good show, almost a full house here. And thank you, Andy, for having me. Apologies to some of our speakers from this afternoon. You're going to see a little bit of a repetition of what I'm going to present here. But like Andy said, I'm coming from very far away, not just getting this across the waters from Victoria. I am a professor in civil engineering, and I run a lab at University of Victoria called Facility for Innovative Materials and Infrastructure Monitoring. So the innovative material part is what I'm going to talk about. And of course, you're talking about plastic waste, but for that waste be innovative material from the outside the just on my slide, a few people to recognize here. We've been actually working on a project that's funded by an organization called NSERC. In other words, that means the federal government funding this particular project. And at the provincial level, we are funded by Recycle BC. And we go to the group that helps us collect all the plastic waste very diligently in blue boxes. So that's Recycle BC. So thank you to all of them. And I just want to acknowledge my presenters who are not here, but Dr. Sharma, who's my postdoc, Dr. Fellow, Jay, who's a PhD student who works in my group, and Sam Baker, who's also an engineer with Recycle BC. So what I'm going to talk about is upcycling plastic waste, like I mentioned, and I apologize in advance if this becomes too technical. I try and keep it not very technical, but again, apologies. When an engineer gets an opportunity, they love to throw graphs and numbers and math at you. So I try and avoid. All right, so this is going to be the focus of my presentation. In simple ways, we divide plastics up into rigid plastic. So milk jugs would be one of those examples of rigid plastic. And other plastic, which falls through the cracks when we try and recycle, are the plastics that you see behind me. So these are examples of the chips bags, which have a foil on the inside and some nice coloring on the outside, the onion bags, and when I go to grocery stores to buy grapes, for example, they come in bags, Ziplocs, for example. So we have everything that we can handle, but we can't handle this plastic right now. So that's what I'm going to talk about. Some numbers, and again, you see this. You've already seen a little bit of this. But of course, the reason why all of you are here is because you already recognize that plastic waste handling is a huge problem, not just in BC, but all across the world. Why I won't bore you with some of these statistics. Of course, this is a huge problem I just mentioned. All right, there we go. So those plastics that you saw in the photograph on the previous slide, Recycle BC actually breaks it down into 6 different categories. And again, those 6 different categories are here: zipper locks, crinkly wrappers, for example, woven nets, like I mentioned, packaging film, and so on. Some of these plastics are a little bit more difficult to handle than the others. The ones that are difficult to handle here are the ones which are actually some sort of a composite. So there's a foil on the inside and there's plastic on the outside. That becomes very, very difficult for us to handle. So we have tons and tons of this plastic. What if we could take some of this waste plastic and not just burn it for its calorific value, but we could actually upcycle it to improve something else. So what if we could use this waste to convert something which is called concrete? I don't know how many of you heard about this. Concrete is the world's most used construction material. So after water, an individual consumes concrete. And you may ask, no, I have never done any concrete. I've never used concrete before. but the way that number is calculated is all the roads, all the pavements, all the sewers, or wherever there is concrete, that's divided by the number of people in a place, and that determines how much concrete each one of us uses. So it's the world's most used construction material. To give you some statistics, cement, we produce about 4 billion tons of cement each year. And cement is only 10% of what goes into concrete. So 4 billion tons in cement, imagine how much concrete we produce every year. Each ton of cement production is associated with about 1 ton of CO2 emissions, right? So it's the most used, has a very high carbon footprint. But we were having this discussion earlier when we were having the workshop, that what if you could make that material last even longer? So concrete is known to last for a very, very long time, 30, 40, 50 years. What if we could make it last 100 years, 150 years? So what we've done is the denominator, which is the lifetime of the material, is actually made much larger. When we take concrete, concrete is a very brittle material. It's very good when you press on it in compression, but it's very bad when you pull on it. Right? So you can have a little block of concrete, you can have an elephant stand on it, nothing's going to happen. But when you try and take that block and try and pull it, it actually breaks relatively much easily. So that's an inherent problem with concrete. And one of the potential solutions is to add small little strands of anything such as steel, carbon, wood-based, or plastic. When we add those little strands in concrete, what it actually does, it makes it much better in tension. So when we do that, that concrete is now called fiber reinforced concrete. And I was making this example earlier on that the use of any type of fibers, it's a well-established technique. Use of any types of fibers in concrete makes it more resilient. It's going to last much longer. It's going to crack much lesser. So anybody concerned about your concrete driveways with lots of cracks on it, and you use some fibers on it, may not be 100% eliminated, but you'd actually have less cracks. Anybody concerned about basement walls leaking by any chance? Yeah, so basement walls, even though we live in a wood house, the basement walls that we live in are usually concrete. And many times you're concerned about water leaking through concrete. So we've done a lot of work on combining fibers in concrete, and at the same time trying to make it more resilient and useful. So again, I'm actually going to run out of time very soon, I know, but this is the idea. So this is concrete here. I'll use my mouse so people on Zoom can see. Okay, the mouse is not going to show up. Anyway, so this is just a cross section of concrete. We add fibers, randomly distributed small pieces. We mix it up in concrete. Like I said, it actually makes it much better. So what if we could use some of these plastics? So this is in Victoria in my lab. We took a random bunch of other flexible plastics. We actually divided it up into 6 different families, and we tried to chop them up, of course, by hand. But the idea would be someday this can be scaled up and can be done with an automated system. So these are all cut into certain sizes that we like to use, mixed into concrete. And what we found was this was actually a very promising technology that we could use. We do, again, this is the part where I save you the trouble of looking through all the math on top. Just focus on the photographs below. So we make little cubes, like I said, the big block of concrete on which the elephant wanted to stand, as opposed to making a big block. We make small little cubes, we make small little dog bone samples, we make small beams, we test them up and see what's the advantage of adding base plastic in the form of fibers. So we've got some very good results. Again, I'll skip some of this part, but that's that cube being tested in compression. That's the little dog bone piece being tested in tension. And that's a little beam in bending or in flexion. This particular photograph I like quite a bit. I don't know if you can see this in the back. If I had no plastic in it or no reinforcement in it, when I load it, this would just simply snap into 2 pieces, just like glass. But just because I have the plastic, you see how the little fibers are bridging across the crack, so it's still holding it together. It might have failed when we talk about it in terms of structural strength, but the fibers are still holding everything. So that's what we like to see in terms of good fibers when used in concrete. some other tests, single fiber pullout and so on. And we love scientific geeky stuff. So what we like to do here, this is the setup that we have in our lab. Plastics, of course, are hydrophobic. They don't like the contact of water with them. But when we talk about cement and concrete, cement and concrete loves water. So how do I make a hydrophobic material stick to concrete? And this is some setup that we do. Try and make plastics a little less hydrophobic, so they actually stick better. All right, so some more visuals on what fibers are doing in each of these photographs behind me. This is the second part, so everything that you saw so far was on the other flexible plastics. This is one example of using something like a milk jug, like I mentioned to you. So milk can, you can chop it up, and what we're doing here is we basically convert it into small pellets, and we actually extrude it through our own system, and we produce filaments. These are the same filaments that you would use in 3D printing, for example. So you would use 3D printing at home. Yeah. So the spools that you buy, technically it's the same process that we follow. The only difference being that our tolerances for producing fibers are much lower than what you need for 3D printing. 3D printing machines require very accurate diameter of the filament. So this is one last little story that I wanted to mention. Again, local from British Columbia, local from Victoria. There's a not-for-profit organization called Soap for Hope Canada. And what they do, or they have been doing for the last decade, I think, is they collect unused shampoos and soap bars from different hotels all across North America. And they take all of that waste product, extract it, and they actually send it to developing countries as to support. I think the tagline for them is keep your hands clean by using soap and washing. Of course, they can extract the product from the bottles, but what happens to the plastic bottles? So they get about 40,000 pounds of plastic bottles each year coming into Victoria. So that's actually the plastic bottles that you see in the hotel, the ones with the pump. So that's being shredded and make it into pellets, and we convert it into fibers and adding that. So again, that's been actually pretty good. Those bottles are mainly PET, so PET that we use. And I just wanted to thank Soap for Hope Canada and for letting us place the waste plastic in Victoria, and all the people that I've already thanked, and Andy, one more time. Thank you very much.
Thank you. A few minutes, if you have any questions for Dr. Gupta. The topic is just so important because it's kind of like climate change. We're well past the point of prevention. Now we have to do mitigation, adaptation, and regeneration to deal with the waste that we've already created. So this is a brilliant step forward. I think, go ahead.
I'm just wondering if you have worked at all in using recycled plastics as a means, as an alternative to concrete. So there's some places in Southeast Asia have started experimental building using plastic planks. Are you involved in that at all, or going a step further instead of it just being, you know, a strengthening supplement to concrete, to potentially plastics being a building material that is instead of concrete, because concrete relies on sand, which is an issue in the world today as well in terms of how much is needed and how much the earth can supply.
That's a very good question, and I can think of 5 different things that I would love to chat with you about. Maybe take one at a time. So once we have the fibers and the pellets, of course, they can be used for anything. It could be injection molding, for example. I don't want to take the thunder away from Kari here, because she is going to talk, I think, about using plastic as perhaps roofing material, right? So again, I don't want to take the thunder away. Back to the sand issue, and I was talking earlier on with one of my colleagues here. The next big wave of waste that's going to hit us is going to be composite materials. So an example being the windmill blades, for example, and we're talking about monstrous blades, right? These are few hundred feet in length, pretty wide. The same material is actually used in bathtubs, for example. The same material is actually used to making boats, for example. So that is going to hit us. And where I'm going with this is we have a project right now where we are actually crushing that to use as a sand replacement.
Okay.
So, and not just as fiber reinforcement, but if you have the right size, you can actually replace sand. At the moment, we are replacing about 10 to 20% sand, but in theory, someday you could actually have all the sand replaced.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments at this point? So just hold your horses a few minutes. We have Dr. Park here who's going to talk a lot about using plastics in building materials in just a few minutes. And as you probably already know too, the Indian government has been using plastic residue in asphalt for road building as well for many years. So there are lots of interesting experiments along those lines. I want to turn it over to Clara Lloyd now. I'm going to come over from Victoria just to speak to you. She's from the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change in Victoria.
Think everything on time. Thank you, first of all, Andy, for inviting me to be here today. Is the founder again?
No, it's fine. I think you can hear her in back, right?
I'm happy to go without a mic, honestly, that would be lovely. Okay. So I'm a senior policy analyst with the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change Strategy, working in the environmental and policy initiatives branch. And I'm here today primarily to talk to you about the new single-use plastic waste prevention regulation here in BC. So we all know that plastic packaging and single-use items are a serious problem, which are harming the environment and also posing risk to human health. British Columbians use and throw out billions of single-use items every year, and these are often turning up our environment. So the majority of the 12 most found items in beach cleanups here in BC are single-use plastic items. And so the single-use plastic waste prevention regulation that I mentioned there at the start is actually one of several measures under the BC Plastics Action Plan, which was released in 2019. And what that plan did is it identified opportunities and policy approaches to help reduce plastic waste and pollution, as well as the regulation. It looked at expanding recycling programs here in BC, and also how to reduce plastics overall. By boosting reuse and also looking at recycled content. In response to that plan, through our public engagement, we had over 35,000 responses, making it the third most popular engagement we've done in recent times. And we heard loud and clear from British Columbians that they really wanted strong action to be taken, including things like bans on certain single-use items. And so really based on that feedback, BC's regulation and the larger plan is looking at phasing out those unnecessary single-use and plastic items, shifting to durable, reusable items and systems, as well as encouraging higher levels of recycling and waste management, so that where we are needing to use plastics, we can make sure that those can stay in our system for longer. The regulation itself, who does it apply to? It applies to business operators and food service providers here in BC. And there's several categories of item that the regulation addresses. First of those is food service accessories. And so that's things like single-use plastic utensils, sleeves, cup lids, splash plugs, as well as napkins and single sachet condiments. Then we have shopping bags, so single-use plastic shopping bags are captured, but our regulation also speaks to the alternatives. We have food serviceware, so that's things like containers for takeout, as well as oxidogradable plastics. And the policy tool for each of these is slightly different depending on the item. So food service accessories, there is now, as of December 20th, a ban in place on single-use plastic utensils in BC, and that includes those made from compostable and biodegradable plastics. And then buyer request requirements are in place for other items that I mentioned. And so that means that either a business can offer it to you when you're at the counter, or they can provide a self-serve station, or you can request a straw or a lid for your drink. Shopping bags, there'll be a ban on single-use plastic shopping bags. And then we're also requiring that businesses prompt customers to use their own. And if they need to purchase one, it's a minimum of $2 for reusable bags and 25 cents for new recyclable paper bags. Food service ware, we are limiting hard to recycle plastics. And again, that includes compostable plastics, biodegradable plastics, PVC, PVDC, as well as polystyrene foam. And lastly, oxidogradable plastics, and that applies to any single-use item or packaging made partly or wholly from oxidogradable plastic. I just wanted to share this on screen. So this is an example of some of the items that we're moving away from along the bottom row there, and the types of items that we're looking to move to. So that's more the best items. We're looking at those reusable systems as opposed to single-use items. This resource is available at our website. I'll speak more about that shortly. We mentioned compostable plastics a couple of times now, and so those are regulated under regulations, specifically bans on shopping bags and utensils made from compostable plastics. And it also applies to the type of food service ware that's used for prepared foods, the type of food that you might get served on a deli counter. And the reason for that is because compostable plastics do not readily break down in facilities here in BC. And therefore, they're currently not actually an acceptable feedstock under another regulation. I can provide more details if anyone wants to follow up with me. But that said, we are continuing to monitor it really closely. The compostable plastic space is developing quickly. We are really paying attention to the science in that space. We're continuing to listen to feedback from our organic matter recycling facilities. And we're also just looking at the developments in that market. You will know there are a couple of scenarios where businesses can continue to sell or distribute those types of plastic. And so one of those is for more shelf-stable type items, so like compostable film wrap around box of cheese, coffee pods, and other items made from compostable plastic in those uses, as well as when they, for instance, a fiber cup, paper food service container, that might be lined with PLA, so that's compostable plastic. That can still be used in BC, but the expectation there is that it is managed through the recycling stream. Ideally, you'd rinse it out and you put it in your blue bin. It shouldn't be going to the compost facilities. So in terms of resources, and I just shared one of those on the screen, everyone has a part to play in reducing plastic waste. We all use it, and so all of us are able to help. And really, the ministry, we're here to really help people and businesses understand how they can do that. So you can see a range of resources that we've developed. We launched a new website today at the address there, ecb.ca/reuse, which has a whole range of resources, including fact sheets, printable posters, as well as 10 cards to help businesses really communicate with their customers about these changes. We also have a buyer's guide to help those in procurement positions to help identify suitable alternatives to their current single-use items, and an alternatives guide and a zero waste gatherings guide. I will just make a special mention of that one. That's been developed in collaboration with the Indigenous Zero Technical Advisory Group. They're a fantastic group here in BC that brings together Indigenous communities working in the space. And we've been able to really tailor that to the needs of those community gatherings that happen regularly. I will have copies of some of these available on the table as you leave today if you're interested. We also are translating all of our materials that I've mentioned into 5 languages, so French, as well as those commonly spoken in BC. So that's simplified and traditional Chinese, Tagalog, as well as Punjabi. And again, we're working with Indigenous communities where they're undergoing language revitalization to really support those efforts in their communities and raise awareness of this regulation. So I will just quickly touch on compliance and enforcement. And we really follow a compliance promotion approach. We're not about to come out with fines and penalties immediately. So if we see somebody using a plastic fork or business using it, we're not immediately going to be slapping them with a fine. Rather, we're doing the education, we're doing the outreach, and we've had a long lead time to help businesses get ready. And really, the other piece to be aware of is that if you were to see something that you thought was a non-compliance, you can report that. So it's a complaint-based approach that we're taking. And so you'll be able to email the address you see on the screen there. Where there's a municipal bylaw in place, so it's here in Vancouver, they can still enforce that locally. And if there is an overlap, then any stricter requirements to take place. A couple of last things I wanted to mention is that we do have some excellent funding programs that go alongside this, and that speaks to that larger circular economy that we're moving plastics to, and how can we really support that. One of those is the Clean BC Plastics Action Fund, and so $40 million has been invested in really innovative projects here in BC that are looking to reduce plastic waste by incorporating more recycled content into food safe products, as an example. We've also supported sharewares and reusables, which are fantastic reusable serviceware container programs here in the Lower Mainland, as well as supporting places like Ocean Legacy, which have got marine recycling facilities, and Fresh Prep that do zero waste at home food preparation kits for people now. We are actually currently taking more applications for funding until funds are used or at the end of this year. And so there are 4 funding streams. The top 2 are ones that were already there. The lower ones are new ones that have been added this year. And so the regional plastic innovation is really to help spur that innovation in communities outside of the Lower Mainland, so more rural areas. And then the Indigenous projects are those led by Indigenous communities. So for instance, installing dishwashing facilities for those larger community events that they have. If you did want more details, we can visit our fund administrator's website, which is down the screen, Alacrity Canada. The other one that some of you may have heard of is Clean Coast, Clean Waters. And so that started in 2020 as part of the Stronger BC Economic Recovery Plan following COVID, really working with coastal communities, Indigenous communities, as well as tourism operators that had been impacted by the economic downturn following COVID. And together we've been able to deliver the largest ever shoreline cleanup in history. And so today, over 4,600 kilometers of shoreline have been cleaned. That's more than the distance from Victoria to Halifax. We've also cleared over 1,500 debris, including 118 derelict vessels, and achieved a 64% recycling or upcycling rate for the products or materials that have been on beaches. And created over 1,700 jobs, more than 300 of those being jobs for youth. Those figures actually just bring you, and so I'm looking forward to being able to share results from 2020 soon. Just one last thing I wanted to mention, and an opportunity for you all to participate in next week, is that we will be releasing a discussion paper. And that discussion paper is really focusing on preventing waste away from home. So most of us in BC, at home, we have access to excellent blue box recycling or depots. But when you're on the go, so if you're at businesses, if you're at restaurants, shopping malls, universities, hospitals, sometimes that can be a little less consistent. And so at the moment, the ministry is, as part of that Plastics Action Plan and the extended Producer Responsibility 5-year plan, reaching out to businesses and everybody to hear what they think. Like, where are you seeing challenges and issues with being able to access recycling when you're out and about? And what are some of the policy approaches that maybe we should be considering as a ministry? So that'll be available on our Engage BC website next week, which is where all our consultations are held. And I'd really encourage everyone to add their voice to that. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions. If I don't get to one today, plastics@gov.bc.ca, we're happy to answer those.
Thank you so much, Claire. Any questions for our provincial government? Carrie.
64% of recycling of the line is really impressive. Could you tell us more about how did you de-recycle them when it's contaminated or by salt water, and it's mixed, it's often very difficult to recycle them.
That's a really good question that I wish I knew the exact answer to. So the way we've achieved that is partnering with Ocean Legacy, and they've built actually several depots with that funding. Some on the island, some on the Sunshine Coast, and there's always one in Richmond where they started, I believe. I know that there's quite a bit of upcycling, so it's not purely recycling necessarily. One of the most, I don't know the technicalities of how they're cleaning it, but I do know that some of the products they've been able to produce include buttons. So they've been actually replacing the virgin plastic buttons on garments, working with a local company on the island. And they make it the Denman Island shirt. And they're being able to reclaim that from the things like oyster trays and those kind of pods. So really fishing and agriculture gear, I guess, aquaculture gear. Otherwise, there's been upcycling around ropes and netting to use in other applications. Imagine quite large. But those are the two main ones that spring to mind. And then there are some, I don't know what percentage of the 64, I think it's relatively small, but there are some materials that are simply taken for kind of art installations and other type large scale installations.
There is an online question, which is why don't we have more depots for soft plastic drop-in off in the city? London Drugs is the only place where soft plastics can be dropped off.
That is an extended producer responsibility question that I'm probably not going to be able to answer.
Well, a good transfer to our next speaker, perhaps.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's going to be a segue for Bob, although he's no longer in the loop. I'm happy to connect with you afterwards if you have.
Any other questions from the audience for Claire Lloyd?
Well, I just want to, thank the BC government, your ministry, and yourself, Claire, very much for your leadership in this area. It very much resonates with citizens, and go for it. No half measures, please. It's not. I'm sure sometimes there's not popular decisions, a lot of pushback, a lot of lobbying going on the other way, but go for it, please. You're on the right track.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you all realize we are the 1% in the world. And so we actually have a much heavier responsibility to try to find a zero waste model. We're not there yet. But, I have relatives in the US, and some parts of the US, there's no recycling. It just doesn't happen. So we have made strides. We still have a ways to go, but policy leadership has been really important.
I appreciate that. And I would just like to reflect back that I'm fortunate enough to be able to be working on the policy I'm working on because of that public engagement. That's, it is that loop. So it's a reciprocal piece. So I thank all of you when you participate in our.
Okay, thank you so much. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
So in Burnaby, there is a recycling depot where you can drop off everything, including soft plastic. Is that not the case in Vancouver or other municipalities?
I'm going to guess it's an accessibility piece. So depots are great if you have a car and you want to travel a distance with a relatively large bag, very high volume, light load to go and sort it. It's accessing it if you're in a multi-residential area, or a condo and you don't have room to store all of that plastic, or you're on a bicycle, myself included. It's sometimes getting access, which is where the store depot drop-off points are really helpful. Yeah, so I'm assuming that's probably where that.
And it happens, the depot's 5 minutes from my home, so.
Fantastic, you're very lucky.
Thank you very much. Oh, one more question, go ahead.
I just wondering, do you have any program for the newcomer and or the international student? Because I find a lot of them, they don't know. The Canada have the really great recycle system. They just dump everything in the garbage bin.
That's a really good reminder. Thank you for that. I'm not aware that we have an active strategy. Most communications around waste are done at the local government level, and so that'd be through the regional district because they're the ones who coordinate waste collections, and so the schedules and even the types of things that can be collected do vary a little bit from municipality to municipality. What I can say is that we are making efforts at the provincial level and around this particular regulation to try and make people, hence the translations. But if you do have further ideas that you'd like to share with me afterwards, I'd be really happy to hear them. That'd be great. And anyone else.
Great, thank you so much, Claire. Okay, our next speaker is Bob Paul. He's a consultant with E5 Solutions. He was also behind the architecture of the EPR Extended Producer Responsibility System province.
I know I have 10 minutes, but my presentation is quite detailed, but I'm gonna be jumping over slides. I just want to have a quick check here. I don't know if this is too loud. How many of you know what EPR is? Just raise your hand. Standard producer responsibility, essentially in BC, what that means is created a system under the regulations called the recycling regulation that allows you to go to a depot or retail to return products that are regulated. So if you ever visited a depot, beverage containers, that's what I'm going to be talking about. Paint, light bulbs, batteries, all part of that one regulation that allows you to recycle. And it's not local government running and paying for that. It's the industry, the producers that sell into the product. Okay. Secondly, how many of you traveled to a Caribbean country and didn't say off of a resort to walk around to see waste issues? Anyone? It's quite a few. Yes. How many of you have been to the resorts and not seen any of the waste? So anyways, I know I probably used about 5 minutes already just talking about that, but Andy, if we can just roll forward, I'm gonna need your help here because I'm not. So I won't go into this agenda, but basically what I'm gonna cover here is give you an example of the beverage container programs that operate in BC. There's 2 of them. And then overlay our success and experience into the global South and Caribbean region, particularly because they have a lot of waste issues. So I picked beverage containers because a lot of beverage containers are floating around the ocean. You'll see pictures of it around the world, and that's one of the easiest places to start EPR if you're going to do anything. So next slide. So the plastics product spectrum, I just want you to get a snapshot of where plastics are in our society and in consumer goods, all the way from what we recycle today through our Blue Box program to products that are not even regulated. I mean, just I'm standing on carpet that's got plastic in it. And just look at the chairs you're sitting in, your clothes. Like it's all around us, right? It offers value. There's no value at end of life if we haven't figured out the solution. So we need to figure out engineering solutions. That's why engineers are here looking at uplifting the value of these materials, either getting them back into the economy again as molecules are broken down mechanically to be reused and reformulated in industry. And I just want to highlight, I can't remember if it's Rishi talked about composites. This is spectrum number 7, where you can see where the complexities are in our society. We're in products that have composites, and we need to work on that to find solutions because we're finding plastics are getting more complex, and we need to, they do serve a purpose, but we need to find a way to undo those composites. So you've probably seen graphics like this. This is adapted from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, linear economy. I think you all know what that's all about. We want to move into the circular economy. Circular economy has technical materials where plastic is, metals, glass, rubber. Biological materials, that's organics, woody biomass is, how do we use that? How do we use advanced technologies to recover energy and work with those materials in the economy, make it more circular? So that's where we want to be. Next slide. Sustainable Development Goals. I put this up here because this is what the circular economy is about, is to try to touch on the 17 goals if we can. And that will give you some peace and comfort because it's spanning across economic, social, and environmental. Okay. Next slide. So EPR in BC, we took the definition from OECD, an environmental policy approach in which producers are responsible for the product, and it's extended to the post-consumer stage. So what that really means is that they're responsible legally for that product they put into the market and financially responsible to take it back. And that's what we've done in BC. Next slide. And here's some instruments to use. So I just want to clarify, some people talk about taxes and levies. Industry doesn't do taxes and levies, government only does that. Okay, industry puts advanced recycling fees on, and they can put deposits on voluntarily, or government can intervene, and that's what we have with beverage deposits. Is for all size containers is 10 cents in BC, and you should be getting 10 cents back. Okay. And here's a snapshot of programs across Canada. You can see we're pretty active compared to the US. Not a whole lot of deposit programs, but there's more coming. But you can see in Canada what's going on. So we're leading in that space. Next slide. So BC's recycling regulation, which creates EPR, was created in the Environmental Management Act, and in 2004, we collapsed a whole number. I think there was 4 regulations that were separate for products, like including the beverage container. We created one regulation, created schedules in the regulation, and now we can regulate as we expand now in that regulation, new product categories with a performance-based regulation, right? That's principle-based, and those are the principles: level playing field, transparency, accountability, and results-based. And this embedded in producers having to report to government July 1st every year on the previous year's operation of the EPR program. And you can also find the reports on government website as well, Ministry of Environment. Okay. And yeah, go ahead. So these are the 2 programs. Just look at the metrics here on Corp in the last couple of years, and the beer program. So beer, why are they so high? Because they have a reverse logistics model. So when their trucks are delivering beer across the province, they can bring back empties, they can bring back packaging. And they're also taking care of their own packaging. That's why they report their packaging results. They're separate from the Recycle BC program. They manage their packaging through their network. Okay. So British Columbia's challenges, and so the challenges today really are in the depot system. We're seeing changes with industry producers trying to cut costs. Automation is coming in, and now it's time to really look at how do we sustain the system that is being under pressure to change because of technology. So the depots are feeling threatened in some respects in BC that the programs that are operated by industry, they want to reduce the costs, bring in reverse vending machines, and therefore people don't go to the depot, right? They feel squeezed out. So we're having issues like that are developing. But the next thing in the evolution of the recycling regulation, we must now regulate reuse. The beer industry reuses their bottle 15 times over. They have a Western Canada pool. That's mostly in the back, Siemens, they can draw from that pool. But the wine bottles that you think you're recycling, they actually break. They break them in the back, and then they start a journey to be finding a market to be made into something, right? If we reuse the wine bottles, it would, slow down consumption in packaging. And a lot of our bottles and wine, they come from China. And if you know China's profile on energy, 60% of that energy is from coal-fired. So we're contributing to global warming. We don't even think about that. So I just want to point that out. So the Caribbean has a big, huge waste problem. It's beyond beverage containers. It deals with hazardous materials, everything. If you ever gone, I was in Aruba, speaking in Aruba on basically this type of presentation at the university. You fly into Aruba, you see the landfill right by the airport. It's sitting right on the edge of the ocean. They throw everything into it. I toured it. There's fire starting in it from batteries being thrown in there. It's just a real toxic mess. So you wouldn't see that unless you went up close to it. But many of the islands, they don't have engineered landfills. It's just dumps, right? And things are thrown away, and valuable resources. We see them as resources here, but they just see it as waste because they don't have a solution, right? They don't have scale to develop a market to get things recycled. And this is just to highlight, there are a couple of deposit programs. Barbados is one of the older ones. It's not true EPR. They kind of missed the point on reporting out to the public on the metrics like what we do here. I have asked the government for reports. They don't have them. There's a lot of the money flow is controlled by the beverage industry there. So you really kind of don't know like how much is really coming back and what is being lost to the environment. So that's that program. And then St. Vincent and the Grenadines has a program that's more government involved in the scheme. And it's not EPR in the sense like we have it here. So highlighting the challenges there, there is an appetite for recycling in the Caribbean. There is definitely, the social license. And if we do more recycling, we are also hitting up, I think I mentioned on the Sustainable Development Goals, is investing in the social capital in these countries by creating a system for take back and processing. I got a few more slides, so just kind of skip through, but you can read these later. And so this is the work the United Nations has been doing on plastics, and Rosalind, who presented earlier, she's been involved, and this is the key one right here, and I think this is what Enrique and a few people are going to Ottawa, is to pick up this discussion on this point here. And EPRs is coming to the Global South countries and small island states, and countries are going to have to respond. So this presentation is trying to highlight that the importance of scaling a circular economy in these regions is going to be needed through this policy. Next slide. So EPR solutions for the Caribbean. So obviously the policy could help solve the problem and create a recycling infrastructure. Today, a lot of money flowing into any cleanup of beaches and that is coming from development banks and other countries making contributions, right? But really the producer should pay for that. So that's not happening, so we want to change that. And I already mentioned that. So the region needs a coordinated response, and hopefully with United Nations organizations having these discussions and EPRs being taught, the push will come into the region and other countries, and it'll just happen. It's going to happen because there's no other solution. EPR is going to drive the circular economy. Next slide. So this graphic is interesting. I put that up there because I did some research. So Jamaica's known for doing primary processing, making aluminum from bauxite. Okay, they do that there. So if we have a beverage industry that has aluminum cans in it, aluminum could be smelted back at modifying these smelters and creating a regional hub for aluminum flow. And then we have 2 oil refineries that I know of, one in Trinidad that's operating, the one in Aruba isn't. And this is where plastics is coming from the oil and gas processing, right? So it can go back to be made into fuels or recycled, but the whole idea is to get it back to where it started from and force circularity to happen. And Barbados is highlighted there because the beer industry in the Caribbean tends to put most of their beer in glass. I haven't seen any aluminum down there, it's all glass. And they do reuse it, but it's one brewery at a time trying to grab it out of the system to come back. But if it was regionalized, you'd be saving a lot of packaging and it could be shared, and standardization of the bottle like we've done here in Canada could be done down there. So comparing the 2 places, BC, I know it's hard. So we have mountains and valleys where we're collecting materials. A lot of our remote communities are far away, so it's a costly system. So when we're paying an eco fee on any product and packaging, it's covering all of BC. So far away is the Peace, Recycle BC, other programs. They're all bringing that material in to central places, using the Lower Mainland, and then they're moving it to the market, or things that can't be recycled or obviously destructed through landfills or waste energy. And one other thing to point out is in the Caribbean, the biggest issue that they face that when I was at University of Aruba is the director of the school was saying to me, the reason why we don't recycle is most of our products are coming in, but they charge us 5 to 6 times more to send it back out. So they don't recycle, they can't. So that's why the producers need to be tagged with the responsibility, so they don't worry about these high costs. So why consider EPR for the Caribbean? Well, it's obviously going to help drive the circular economy. There's a lot of economic investments to be made in the system. And it could start with beverage packaging, but then it can move on to other products like we've done in BC. And I'm not going to go through all of this near the end here, but these just to highlight some of the reasons why the governments there need to consider that. And also, as I mentioned earlier, to measure your EPR policy against the Sustainable Development Goals, here's what I mapped out for direct impacts on those goals and indirect. So there definitely is, benefits here to be doing EPR policy. I know a lot of companies talk about circular economy, we want to take our stuff back, but when you're talking about changing the landscape, you need to create a level playing field on the whole producers selling into the market through EPR. That's it.
Thank you, Bob. So there are two really important points there, which is make the companies responsible for the pollution they're creating. Imagine if we could do that with the fossil fuel company. What a game changer that would be, to make them responsible for all the emissions and health issues that they've created over decades and never really taken responsibility for, even to the point where we're still subsidizing these companies that are creating so much pollution. So EPR is a really powerful concept. And the other important thing, of course, is drink less soda and less wine and more beer. Any other questions or comments for Bob?
Yeah, I started a project in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, 1986, looking at the impact of tourism on waste, among other things. And that's stimulating. Of course, the tourism industry was quite suppressed in St. Vincent because of the size of the airport. So it was blessed by a smaller volume of tourists than Barbados or Jamaica, etc. But the problem was that the big distributors like Coca-Cola and that scale, they were as powerful as the government departments. They had the influence at cabinet, which was not very large. This is a long time ago. You'll think this is probably a bit strange to talk about the 1980s, but since I studied this in St. Lucia and Antigua and so on, I began to learn that this asymmetry was endemic. And so I'm asking you, since I think you've had recent experience, what has, vis-a-vis waste, have the cabinets and the government departments that are responsible shifted their shape and grown more strength, etc.?
I think not much has changed. And let me just share with you, Mike. So I was at the Caribbean Water and Wastewater Conference in Bahamas in 2022. And then I get invited to go into the ministers' meeting on waste. And I had the opportunity to talk to Minister Gonzalez for Trinidad and Tobago on the environment. Because I had heard previously that they've had on the books, and you can Google this, I just recently did this, just to make sure that they hadn't put in a beverage container law. It's still there, it hasn't passed, he hasn't signed it. I said, Minister, you have an opportunity now with all the plastic issues to start with this and create a legacy for yourself and make the decision, and other countries will follow you, right? And despite that conversation, he was really, happy to hear that. And he said, Bob, we'll be in touch with you. And well, they never contacted me. And I said, look, we got a lot of experience from Canada to share with you, right? You guys got a lot of problems, and we can help out sort these problems. But so not much has changed. I don't know what it's going to take. I mean, I could keep trying and keep presenting, keep going to those meetings. I think it's going to be United Nations push from different agencies. That's because a lot of these countries, they signed on to the Global Plastics Treaty, and EPR is mentioned in it. And when it hits them, they're going to have to figure it out. So what I'm talking about is scaling it for the region, to creating a regional system, right? And that's what we need to do.
Yeah.
So we'll see. I don't know. So not much has changed because I feel like in the last 3 years, I keep talking to a lot of people and nobody's really like grabbing the bull by the horns. Including I have like the contact for United Nations Environment Program in Jamaica, who invited me to the high-level meetings. And, they know that we're here to help, but nothing's happening.
Okay, now you know what it's like to be a professor. I'm gonna turn it over to Mark McLaughlin from SFU to give us the local perspective.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Dr. Hira, for giving the land acknowledgement at the start of the session today. That's really, really important. My name is Mark McLaughlin. I'm Chief Commercial Services Officer at Simon Fraser University. So that means I'm responsible for a lot of sort of ancillary operations, non-academic, but things like food services, a bookstore, spirit shop, parking services, meetings and events, and things of that sort. Rita was co-presenting with me. She can't be here this evening, so she sends her regrets. Are there any landfill operators here this afternoon? Anybody own a landfill? No? Well, just as well, because I got bad news for you. There's a lot of people in this room and a lot of people around the world working to put you out of business. And it just can't happen fast enough. Could you kind of minimize that? No, just go back. Just minimize the Zoom thing. Okay. Right? So that's a picture of, of a recycling center over there. Just, click on the, get rid of it. Not that. No, down.
Oh, I see. Okay. Yeah.
All right, I just want to show the nice recycling facility there, right? That's probably like a lot of plastic packaging there, right? Our plastic bottles, our recycling went in the blue bin, went in the truck, ended up in the facility. Where do you think it goes next?
Philippines.
Beg pardon?
Philippines.
It could go to probably the Philippines, probably goes to an incinerator or probably a landfill, right? Just because the plastics make it to a recycling facility doesn't mean it comes out the back end in pellets or going to a plastics facility. There's not a market for it. So, right, you can't recycle your way out of the climate crisis. Recycling doesn't really work. You really got to focus on reusing. You got to focus on refusing, right, and reducing. Simon Fraser University, our Board of Governors declared a global climate emergency in 2022. And that means that the Board of Governors and the university takes climate crisis very seriously. And we work very hard in many aspects, whether it's academics, research, and even operations to kind of do our part and to make this world a better place. We launched in 2019 a program called Reuse for Good. And that's what we're going to be talking about a little bit today, a little bit about the process. Greta. Greta, actually, I think she was arrested a couple of weeks ago. Good for her. She was on the scene. She was pretty mean, kind of pre-COVID, right? And this is, our students are very passionate. Our students are very passionate about environment. And that's really important. The students push universities, they push our administration, they pushed us. And we had to respond. And universities are not usually fast at responding. We like to see what's going on, look at others, who else is doing what. But at SFU, we said we have to, our students are important. They're pushing us, so we have to do something about the single-use plastics problem we have on campus. So we're going to talk about what we did. We also partnered. We reached out to the City of Vancouver, the province of BC, and also the federal government. There was like a lot of work happening in these areas, kind of pre-COVID, right? Starting with these issues. Okay. And some of the facts, right? Plastics are really cheap to produce and cheap to get rid of. There's a culture of consumerism, single use, right? Fast fashion, we all know about that. And here today, only 11% of plastics are recycled. So that number, we heard different numbers today. It could be 9, could be 8, could be 12. But it's not 100%, it's not 50%, right? So those single-use plastics, even less for single-use plastics. So here's some numbers at SFU. Just hit the next button there, please. So kind of pre-COVID, we used to give out at the bookstore 100,000 plastic bags a year. Now 900,000 coffee cups and bubble tea cups, and 180,000 plastic bottles, the water bottles, and the Pepsi bottles, the Coke bottles. How many SFU students are here today? Who's a student at SFU? You know, if you ask questions, I get a little surprise for you. Door prizes. How many of you have bought, let's say, a water bottle at SFU lately, a plastic single-use water bottle at SFU in Burnaby, Surrey? How many? Well, you probably haven't, right? Because we don't have any. If you walk in our Tim Hortons, you walk in our Starbucks, you walk in any of our dining facilities, you walk in, you go up to a vending machine. There's no plastic bottles. There's no plastic water bottles. There's no plastic Coke bottles. There's no Gatorade. There's no Pepsi. We're the only university to have banned single-use plastic bottles on campuses. A lot of universities have banned the water bottles, single-use plastic bottles. We're the only ones we know of that have done the full deal. And because there's money in plastic, right? And there's money in beverages, but we said, no, let's get rid of the plastic. Let's focus on aluminum and glass. We have no more plastic bags. Back in the day, students used to buy textbooks. They don't buy textbooks anymore. So I don't know, maybe we're saving 50,000 bags a year. Plastic bottles is down to zero. The disposable cups, spoiler alert, we're still at probably 1 million disposable coffee cups, bubble tea cups on our campus. That's a big problem. We have to focus on that, and the solutions aren't obvious. Students, faculty, staff, only about 3% of them bring a reusable mug on our campus. That's bad, right? So we have to find a solution. Is it giving a bigger refund, a bigger discount if you bring a reusable mug, get 50 cents off instead of only 10 cents, or can we charge you more, right? If you don't bring one. These are all the other things we have. Takeout containers, straws. Well, we used to have a lot of these utensils, shopping bags, single use, and styrofoam. For sure, that's gone. So, what's the next slide there? So we started. We put together a task force. We did some publicity. If you click on it, there's a little video.
Over 1 million single-use plastics and products, including cups and bottles, are disposed of at SFU each year. And students have been asking us, what are we doing about this? Well, we've been listening, and we came up with a plan. In 2019, we launched Reuse for Good, a new zero-waste initiative. Reuse for Good has already made a huge impact. We've reduced unnecessary single-use disposable products while providing reusable alternatives. We've made reusable bottles available for purchase, and we've installed water bottle filling stations, saving hundreds of thousands of plastic bottles from landfill. And in 2021, we phased out single-use plastic beverage bottles from our campuses. SFU is leaving single-use items in the past, and our community is invited to get involved by resolving to BYOB, bring your own bottle. All of our work is done in consultation with the SFU community to ensure accessible options are available to all. Learn more at sfu.ca/reuseforgood.
Presentation right there in a minute. It actually didn't work this afternoon but I want to talk about the process, because at universities and big institutions, it's all about the process and about policies and process. And it's about setting up committees, and things are slow, right? So it was really, the way we did this was really a collaboration between the Ancillary Services, which I mentioned I work for, and the Sustainability Office at the university. And we set the tone. We said, we're not going to take 2 years to study this and research this. And we said, let's start. Let's learn by doing. We're going to make mistakes. That's okay. But let's start, make sure we have to pivot quickly. And the key thing is we built a task force of change makers. Didn't put a committee together. We called it a task force of change makers. We personally selected champions on our campus, people who actually get things done on this committee. And that's kind of like even, it's kind of, normally there's processes to select people, we hand select people. We set up an advisory group as well. These are sort of experts from the industry. Tim Reeves was there. Some people might know him, some professors were there. So they were kind of like our, advisory group, sounding board, we were running things by them. And then we decided at that point to get senior administration buy-in. We didn't start with buy-in there because we know what they would have said. So we got going, we got out of the gate, brought students on board, and then got going. And it was really important to use an equity process. We included students, we reached out, we consulted with our accessibility offices and with our neurodiverse student alliance. They were all part of this. So we looked at that from those angles. And the next slide is a continuation of the process. Okay, we did some consultation, kept it quick, and then we got going with operational plans and then obviously communications. We secured a bit of funding so we could hire a program coordinator. Infrastructure was really important because that meant like we wanted to put things in place like dishwashing facilities. That was a big one, and we still have a long way to go on that front. But just water bottle filling stations. We're up to 168 water bottle filling stations on our 3 campuses. And that's important, right? That there's alternatives to the single use. And then we did marketing and then press the button, there we went. All right. It's a little bit of repetition, but I like this image here. We've had that, so I want to make sure I got that on the screen. It was pretty good. But it was very much, what are the key successes to our success? We thought, we put change makers at the table, brought everyone together. You see the administration as well as students. Accessibility and inclusivity was a big focus. We actually hired students, we gave them jobs. Those students who were complaining, we said, okay, come to the table, and then we kind of gave them summer jobs too. We said, we need you to work for us. They did audits and things like that. And then we learned by doing, right? We didn't have all the research. Sometimes the research is conflicting. Sometimes you look at the research and you realize, oh, it was sponsored by Coca-Cola. Oh, that's why. So you have to be careful, that sort of stuff. Anyway, we just got out of the gate and got going. And very much about the students who are behind this. This is Emma Chung. She was just great. She was one of our coordinators. Got a great quote there. And right, so a bit of repetition here, but we had to provide that infrastructure first for the reusables. So if we're going to eliminate the water bottles on our campus, we had to make sure that reusable water bottle filling stations were there. We raised awareness, included everyone. Back then, we used the term like zero waste. That was a big thing back then. Now it's kind of surgery gone. And then this is really important because, we didn't just ask. We were, you can ask the first time, but then you got to push, and you really got to push and push pretty hard with the multinational companies, food service providers, vending companies. We're very fortunate. We've got a great company, Chartwells, that provide the food service on our campus. But even to get them to change their ways is very difficult because they have processes, they have contracts, but they came on board, right? Because it's going to be, sometimes it's more costly to provide those metal utensils instead of the plastic utensils and things like that. But then we met up with companies like Pepsi and Coke, and they don't really like us anymore because we said we're getting rid of their plastic bottles. They said, well, don't do that. Just wait, we're coming up with a better plastic. We're coming up with a bio-plastic. Plant-based, just wait, we're up to 35%, we're gonna go to 40% plant-based in our plastic bottle. It's coming. I said, no. There's no such thing as a better plastic bottle. So we told them we're getting rid of them. We like aluminum, and we like glass. They don't like that. Glass costs a lot more money to transport. But anyway, we sent them a message and went to their head office, say no, and they don't really like us. Starbucks, we talked to Starbucks pre-COVID to do coffee cup pilot projects where we started to re-engage with them. And I know here in Vancouver, in the city of Vancouver, there's some of the Tim, Starbucks, A&W have a coffee cup recycling program where they actually, the single-use coffee cups are actually collected and baled and sent to the US, at least. They're not going to landfill. Not easy, right? So, okay, next slide. Skip this one. Repetition. What do we got? So we went through the whole process. There's a lot of success stories. We talked about international students before. How do they know, right? They throw out a lot of things. A lot of students come here to BC. They don't realize that we have fresh water, right? We have mountain fresh water, glacier fed water. We have safe water here. And so you don't have to buy water here. It's there for the taking. We partnered with Return-It. We have one of the first express and go containers, right? So we've brought recycling facilities local. We were talking about that a bit today, to make it easy for people to, and hopefully you're all using express and goes, or at least returning your bottles, beverage bottles to the depot. We did some living labs. We kind of looked at these compostable, foodwares. They're not good. The compost people don't like them. The recycling people don't like them. Nobody likes them, but it's like greenwashing, right? They don't compost. Hate to tell you, they don't compost, and they don't they muck up the recycling. So we got to get rid of those. Mug share programs are good. In Vancouver, very fortunate. There's a company called Chop Value. I'm not sure if any of you have heard of it. They not only recycle chopsticks, they upcycle chopsticks. And so on our campus, we have all these bins, and we collect all the used chopsticks. They're dirty. They go in there, and Chop Value picks them up, and they convert them into furniture. So this could be a Chop Value table, and it's great. They clean them, and it's like now they franchise. There's like, I don't know, 50 factories around the world now. And in this instance, we actually we had to make SFU letters. So some of you will see that on the Burnaby campus, they're on wheels. And so there's 118,000 chopsticks in there. So there's, I don't know the number of GHGs, but we've diverted that from probably landfill, and we turned it into, I guess, SFU letters, kind of, but it's a whole upcycling thing. We have other success stories. Reusable.com was mentioned before. They're a BC-based company that does takeout ware. So if you go to Mackenzie Cafe, we don't have single-use disposable takeout containers. Well, we do, but it's 50 cents more. But if you want the reusable.com one, that's the default. And it's just through an app. It's really easy. And so you go there, you ask whatever it is, sushi, omelet, whatnot. It goes in a reusable.com container. And 97% of them come back. They just get washed and they're recycled. Whereas the takeout containers, we know they end up in one of those bins there and probably end up in that pile we showed you before, and probably in some incinerator. So those are the type of things we're working on, and there's some contact info. So if there's any questions, and remember, if there's any SFU student have questions, I have
Thank you so much, Mark. Since Mark is local, I'm going to get a hold off on comments and questions and turn it over to Dr. Curie from University of Cambridge.
Come see me after. Free coffee coupons. But there's a catch, you have to bring this one.
Curie's been working the last 2 years on a upcycling project in remote Nepali villages. So something completely different here.
We're gonna be watching feels like.
Here, and I've been running this for plastic car. Means house in the public. In a project of plastic. We manufacture for the local housing. There are two focuses of this project. Is we're trying to, other than this is the innovation you need to have in the part we wanted to establish an ecosystem that will enable the locals to come up with their own innovation ideas and become entrepreneur in their local area. And second focus is that to turn the plastic into durable, long-lasting housing products that will improve living conditions without transport plastics and the materials long distance. If you look at it, you can look this system a little bit different, similar to Canadian mountains. It's but in the context, 75% is mountains, and of which 15% is of 3,000 meters high sea level. And as you can see, there's no way that you can carry plastic waste all the way from mountains. Once it's gone up, it cannot come down. Because many remote areas, you either on the yak or donkey or human are the only way to transport anything from A to B. So there's no way that you can have centralized cycling facilities that because just can't bring it down. So with that chronic inaccessibility issues, because of that, there are many places that there's no local waste collection system. So dumping in the nature or the burning in the open air is the very practice to reduce volume of waste and to just reduce manage the waste at the household level. And this picture is taken in not only in the rural area, but it was taken in the Kathmandu. So because households that they burn plastic, burning is part of their religious practice that's very common. So they do burn many of things. And the problem is that they are not aware of the harmful effect of burning plastic. So the moms will just kids playing around with the fires like this. And at the same time, because of the remoteness and the isolation, there's a big room for improvement in their living conditions. Oftentimes, because of the transportation cost, the material can be 3 times more expensive for the cost than the material itself. So the many houses we go around is rather maintained in a very ad hoc manners. It's very necessity materials. And after the earthquake in 2014 and 2015, they started to replace their roofs like stone roofs with the tin roofs like this because it's durable, it's lightweight, and it's affordable. So we won't kill even if it is in the water in the earthquake. But because it's baited with the metal, it gets really cold in winter and it's very hot in summer and noisy in the rainy season in summer. And there's no concept of insulation in houses. The people just layer up and put fire inside when it gets cold. So this is very typical photo from the one of the houses that we visited in the mountain villages. So they set fire inside the house for heating and cooking. And 80 to 90% of households that rely on firewood for their uses for housing, cooking, and heating. And the poor insulation means that they would need not unnecessarily more amount of firewood at home. So this can be a good opportunity for us not only tackle plastic waste issue, but also to climate change mitigation issues. Sorry, I'm just attacked by the jet lag. I'm losing my mind. So I see it's a good opportunity if we can do something with the plastic waste, with the insulation or roofing. So how do we tackle these challenges though? So in collaboration with Impact Hub and Cambridge, University of Cambridge, we came up with this approach to co-create the innovation systems and the support entrepreneurs for distributed small-scale plastic remanufacturing across Nepal. The distributed means that it's not centralized, but rather than having a large-scale one facility in somewhere like near Kathmandu, we are focusing on having small scale across Himalayan regions and some across different regions in Nepal. And we want to do it by bringing different systems and structures, engaging with the locals and bringing our innovation mechanism and incubating them into businesses through master classes and coaching. And we are bringing the locals from the TLL 0, technology readiness level 0 to 9, which is commercialized level. And the focus is we do this for the locals, by the locals, with the local waste. But I won't go through all the up to the final slides, but I rather wanted to show you how we do this, and some of the I brought some examples here. So by engaging with the locals, we identify the most abundant plastic types they have in the village. And this is crisp packets, but in mountains, they consume this instant ramen noodles like papas in one noodle every day. So household, they often have 10 or 11, 12 family members, meaning that 10 packets and 12 packets every day. This is most abundant, but as Rishi mentioned, this plastic with multi-layer plastic coated with the plastic and the aluminum in it, it's very difficult to recycle. So that's been a big bad boy, but we have been experimenting with this so that we can turn this into a good plastic board. And also we have a interesting technology we found in Vietnam. They can fuse them into really nice material. It can turn into a roofing material. And with the aluminum in it, it can be reflecting the UV, so that it can actually enhance the reflect the UV, so you can keep it cooler in summer. And so the heat transfer rate is much better than this metal. So this is actually, this bad boy can be useful, and this we are really thinking this can be really good. It's a really hopeful direction for us. And we have, this is second biggest material we find is a polypropylene. Lots of packaging. You can see in. I was rummaging into Andy's recycling bin, and like, okay, we have all of the pieces here. So we do this with that. We can turn them into like plastic board like this, and the bins. So this can be used as a floor tiles, and this can be used as a plastic bins, so that it can be used for furniture inside the house. And the other really abundant plastic is LDP. This plastic bags is now banned in BC. This is great, but in Nepal it still is very useful, and they use it a lot. But because it's soft and it's big in volume, but weight is like so low, so oftentimes also in Nepal it's not being used a lot. So, but this can be turned into nice sheets like this. And this can be used in only very simple technical shot press. So it doesn't require very difficult technology, but you can use this shot press here, and it can make it made into sheets, and it can be used for waterproofing your wooden furniture. But what we found in Nepal is that when I said this tin roof is very common for roofing material, and oftentimes you can have some holes in here. So we just turn them into very simple roofing repairing kits. You can turn, it's kind of ad hoc, but it really works well. So we piloted in spring. We're testing it and waited for the heavy rain to see like whether it stands still. And the other interesting material we developed is also it's made with the PP polypropylene. There's a machine called Polyfloss, developed by some design students from Royal College of Art in London, and using some sort of similar technology as cotton floss, cotton candy, and you can make it into floss like this, and then you can make a very nice insulation material that can enhance the temperature control in the house and also the noise in the house. Because this is like a normally 0.6 millimeter thickness, and this is only, so oftentimes this is only roofing that will stop you from rain coming into the house. So, but when it comes to rainy season in monsoon, in heavy rain, it gets so noisy. And like oftentimes this is the only roofing tiles when roofing material used in the school. So the kids in the back of the classroom, just they can simply listen to their teachers. And in the house, when I was staying in one of the mountain villages, I couldn't sleep, so I had to wear my earplugs and the noise cancellation headphones, and that was how I could sleep. So this can actually improve the living condition, also education performance of the kids. On the other side here, but because it's when it comes to housing material, it has to be very important. The important part is being safe, and the fire issues or UV issues has to be really strictly compliant. So we're talking about like fire resistance of this material, and what should we do? We don't want to add any additives or coating in here, but maybe that should be the way to go. But one night, one of the members of this company who's developing this had a dream of his grandmother painting the wall with the mud, which is a traditional way of decorating or purifying the house. And then, but he's got an idea when he woke up. Oh, so he maybe we can do something with it. And then he soaked a cotton cloth in the muddy water and stuck it to the floors. And then we tested it with open flame, and it turned out to be fire resistant. So it's not like rigorously tested yet, but we see the opportunity with the indigenous skills that can be still used really safely, because it will stop the flame touching the fiber directly, and also give the traditional feeling of the look of the traditional houses even after it's been enhanced. So this is some of the innovations we're trying to. Some of them are piloted, and we already have some companies having clients already. And with these companies, we are trying to have multiple different waste hubs in the Himalayan region. We call it a community hub. And we get in the Karai region, which is flat region, we can have a little bigger quantity, and we call it super press hub. So we're trying to conquer entire plastic issues in Nepal, and turning them into precious resource materials. Thank you very much.
Curie deserves a special round of applause because, you know, I thought it was hard enough to do recycling or find zero waste solutions in the UK or in Canada, and she decided to go one of the most remote corners in the world. So she invited me to come and help her to write up an article about some of her experiments. And I didn't realize it was 6 hours off Mountain Rose and then another 7 hours by Jeep to get to one of these villages where she's been working all over the country. So just really amazing in that. If you need to check out some of these upcycled samples, please come down. And thank you so much for being a great audience. And thanks for all the questions and participation. Have a great night.
You're welcome to come and touch and feel